First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the many lands in which we meet today and pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. Just a quick reminder, this session is interactive and you can ask a question at any time from Dr. Wedler by using the chat function in Zoom. If you are using a screen reader, it is keystroke Alt-H and then type your question. So our guest at this time is Dr. Hoby Wedler, a scientist in biochemistry, an entrepreneur, a sensory expert, assisting some of the largest organizations around the world. Barack Obama named him a champion of change for enhancing employment and education opportunities for people with disabilities. And Forbes Media named him a leader in food and drink in their 30 Under 30 annual publication. Dr. Wedler, thank you for joining us.
Jordan, thank you very much for inviting me, and please call me Hoby. That two-letter prefix is just a formality, and I'm thrilled to be with you all today, and it's a real honor. I think that the work of Vision Australia is incredible, and boy, Jordan reached out to me a few months ago, maybe 6 months ago, and what can I say? I'm honored to be here.
Dr. Wedler, can we start? Well, I'm sorry, should I say Hoby? My apologies.
No, you're fine.
Can we start by asking the question that many people may have asked you in the past? Why did you choose to become a scientist?
Boy, that's a great question, and if I'm being boring or long-winded, I invite and encourage actually anyone in the chat to chime in and let me know of that. This question is a really good one and has a few facets to the answer. I've always loved figuring out how things work on my own and tinkering and observing things around me and how they sort of behave and interact with one another. So for me, first of all, we grew up, my sighted brother and myself, with parents who had extremely high expectations of us, still do have high expectations of us. And they also basically reminded us very often as they wanted that, and we needed that we needed to take responsibility for our lives and our actions. And kind of this was our life to live. So that led me to really get excited about things that I was interested in. And I recall standing at the counter back in 1991 in my kitchen in April of 91. April 28th was the date. And I remember that because it was a significant turning point in my life when I reached for the kitchen tap to turn on water and fill a glass of drinking water. And I'd done this probably dozens, if not hundreds of times before. But at that point, I had this weird aha moment that hit me. And that was that, how is water getting from wherever it comes from into my house? And it led to a bunch of questions of my parents and a field trip down to the Water Resources Department. And I realized at that point that there was a whole beautiful network or tapestry of plumbing, of pipes running under the streets of the city or town and basically bringing water to everyone's house. I thought that was really special. My parents did and still do all of their own work on the house. And when we were growing up, that was largely to teach us how to work with our hands, how to do things with our hands, and to raise curiosity. So it was not uncommon for us to get done with schoolwork in the late afternoon and then, get done with school, do a bunch of homework that's required, and then work on the house until dark. And just got so much immersion to so many different processes, from plumbing to electrical to carpentry. And I remember my father is skilled in so many different areas in terms of working on things and working with his hands, and has done a lot of work with the local power company. That's where he worked for 35 years, and studies electricity and plumbing and carpentry, all these things. And I recall turning on a vacuum cleaner at one point a few years later and realizing that this thing whirred to life. And I kind of asked him, I know that electrons drive this stuff and create energy. That led to a whole discussion where I learned that when we buy electricity, we're not actually paying for the electrons. Rather, we're paying for the electromotive force or voltage that pushes those electrons through the wire. So that was deeply fascinating to me, and just a wonderful understanding. And it sort of spawned my love for taking things apart and putting them back together again, and really figuring out how things work by asking questions and forming my own hypotheses. And like many folks, I had an excellent teacher of chemistry in high school, and I realized that chemistry was just my thing. I sort of had a knack for it. But this teacher, I can tell a story later about how she started out really not knowing what a blind person could do, and being quite discouraging, frankly, as to whether I should pursue chemistry further than in this high school honors chemistry course. But I ended up getting really excited about chemistry, and studying it in college, and then eventually in graduate school, not actually with the goal of doing a bunch of research, but with the goal of getting other people around me excited about studying chemistry and science in general. And that work led to a bunch of opportunities. And I didn't continue on with the chemistry journey post PhD. I ended up really finding another passion, which is entrepreneurship. But that's a long-winded way of saying how I got into science.
Yeah, and I look at, as you said numerous times, that passion for how things work, I suppose sometimes we as human beings just take things for granted. We go, well, that works because it works,
Yeah.
without sort of deep diving into exactly why it works.
I
What
was
was
the
some of
nerd that loved the deep dive. Always. Yeah, because it's fun to figure out.
So some of the obstacles that you were facing while you were studying your PhD, did you come across some people that were of that sort of mindset of, if something works because it works, and it doesn't work because it doesn't work?
Yeah, it was interesting. And I think a lot of people are that way, that they use things, and they use them every day, and they work fine, and and that's totally fine. I say that everybody is good at something, and everybody uses their skill set for something. And just because not all people study science or think about business the way that I do, doesn't mean they're not good at things. Everybody has their skill set. And if you're an accountant, for instance, you turn on the tap and the water comes on because it comes on, and it shuts off. And if there's a problem, you know who to call to fix it. So it's this idea of knowing what you need to know to get through with every system. And when something happens, you know exactly what to do to fix it. I think that's the definition of success in this world that we live, is if you know enough to solve problems, and if there's something you come across that you don't know, you're willing to call the right person and get assistance with figuring it out. And I think that's a big part of how anyone can do anything that they want, is to know how to ask for help, and not to be afraid to ask for help. And on top of that, to embrace the fact that a lot of people know a lot more than we do, and we can learn from them in so many ways.
So Hoby, I'm this teacher that you're talking about, that was a good teacher. I see a young Hoby Wedler wander in with his cane, and I sits down in the front row, or wherever he may sit in the classroom, and I think to myself, how do I teach? How do I teach Hoby here to do what he wants to do with his life? How did that teacher get through to you, or how did you get through to that teacher?
Boy, it's such an interesting thing, and I think this is so true with getting accommodations and advocating for ourselves. What I like to say is that it's all about being nice to people. It's all about getting people to understand what we do at their level and at our level. So I wanted to make it just as exciting for her to think about how to teach a blind student as it was for me to be in her honors chemistry class. So a couple of different things that I learned early on in high school, and then definitely carried with me on to college and beyond, is that if something is unclear, now is the time to speak up. Not 5 minutes from now, not 10 minutes from now, but now. Okay, what did you just write on the board that wasn't necessarily said? And I think that really helped teachers and instructors feel comfortable, because it wasn't done in a rude or sort of litigation sort of way. It was done in a, oh, hey, can you remind me what you wrote on the board? And then they realized very quickly, oh yeah, that's right. That's not necessarily going to be apparent to my blind student. Kind of an interesting thing happened. I had the same teacher for physical science, which I took in my freshman year of high school. I think the terms freshman, sophomore, junior, senior are synonymous with the Australian school system. Is that true?
Uh, so it would have been high school, then university.
Meaning,
So when you would have had the same teacher in high school, and
ah,
then you would have gone to university and then had the same teacher
got it.
again.
Okay. Yes. So
Yeah.
at 14, I took a physical science class, and then at 16, I took honors chemistry because I tested into the course, and she couldn't really tell me no because I tested into it. I got one of the high scores on the test because that's what I wanted to do. Um, Her main point of concern was making the lab space safe and accessible. So she and I worked through it and actually found a student who had taken the course just a year before me to sit down and work with me on lab work. And this student also worked with me on being a scribe on exams. So she would read the question and I would solve the problem myself, usually using my braille writer and my mind as well. And then I would deliver an answer that she would write down. um, the way that I got through to this teacher ultimately was to just help her understand that having a blind student in class was fun and could be a challenge, but a good challenge at that. Um, she did, however, for the first part of the course, for the first about half year of the course, she would tell the whole class, oh, chemistry is everything. We eat it, we drink it, we breathe it. It's earth that we walk on, which made the physicists mad because oftentimes physics can be thought of as more fundamental. Anyway, that's what she told us. And she said, you all should think about pursuing chemistry later as something more than just a prerequisite for what you think you actually want to do. Chemistry really is exciting. And I think I might have been the only student in the class that thought, oh, that's great. I love this. I think I might pursue it further. And I would talk to her. I would always very diligently try to go in during hours when assistance was offered. So during a tutorial period or during the lunch hour, and work with her to gain the assistance that I might need to thrive and learn and do my best in her class. But interestingly, I would have conversations with her when I'd be in there more one-on-one and say, I understand that you think chemistry is visual, but do you think I can pursue it on my own? And she'd say, no, it just doesn't make sense. It's pretty impractical. And I thought of my response to her during the second week of the second semester. I said, you know what? I'm going to go talk to her. So I went into her classroom early in the morning when I knew she would be there, but no students would be there because the day hadn't started yet. And I said, let's think about chemistry and let's understand that nobody can see atoms. Chemistry really is a cerebral science. And sometimes we use our eyesight to obtain some information from what's happening or to pour chemicals safely and measure things safely. But the art of doing chemistry and the science of chemistry really is in our mind. It's cerebral. And just to give people an idea of how small and limited the visible spectrum is of the entire electromagnetic spectrum, we can only see light between 400 and 700 nanometers in length. But the electromagnetic spectrum goes from picometers, 10 to the negative 12 meters, one quadrillionth of one trillionth of a meter, all the way out to full meter lengths. Some waves are 10 meters long. So that is like 12 orders of magnitude. And we can only see one little tiny range of it. So there's so much of even understanding and gaining chemical data that is non-visual, where we use instruments with detectors literally to look at our samples for us because the information that we take in is far off the visible spectrum. So I guess my point here is that it's all about thinking about vision and eyesight, if you want to call it that, as a very minor component to the work that we really want to get done.
So you obviously went in prepared and had a prospectus of what you were going to discuss. Had you ever doubted your own abilities in the chemical field
I
before having that
definitely,
discussion?
I definitely did. I thought, now she's right. She's my superior. She's my teacher and telling me this really doesn't make sense. But I enjoyed it so much that I thought there's got to be a way for me to make sense out of studying chemistry. And when I told her that, she said, wow, you're right. And really became someone who was and still is to this day, actually, a huge ally and supporter.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So your first memories of the lab, uh, what was could you describe it for us? Something you couldn't anticipate, really?
Yeah, just stepping into the laboratory and feeling the bench and the coolness of the bench top and all the gas mains and chemistry labs have gas mains that you can connect up your Bunsen burners or whatever you want to. Also vacuum hookups so that you can pull a vacuum if needed using various apparatuses. So examining all that and feeling all the equipment as we became familiar with it was something that was so exciting to me. And I'm a very particular individual where I want to do as much as I can independently and make the work that I do as accessible as possible to me. But I always, for safety reasons, and because I think it's just being prudent, would have someone around as my eyes, and they would do anything that we found unsafe. But I would fully examine all the equipment and gain a good grasp of it. One of the things that I adopted later in college that I'll just say here was I didn't necessarily know, even if I asked my lab assistant to read the lab manual ahead of time, so they knew exactly what the experiment was, or if I needed to design an experiment, I would design it with, and then let them know of it. In order to make sure that they read all the materials accurately, I would actually sit down and have them read the lab manual aloud to me. And if it was a pre-designed experiment, we would follow the instructions. But if it was something that I needed to design, I would design it with them right there, so that we all knew exactly what was necessary from a safety perspective. But what I really remember is stepping into the lab the first day of honors chemistry and performing a reaction of copper chloride. It's dissolved in water with aluminum. So if you take copper chloride and dissolve it in water, and then add a sheet of aluminum foil, literally, beaker gets very warm. It's an exothermic reaction, and you end up creating aluminum chloride, and you have copper that solidifies out and replaces that aluminum foil. It's called a single replacement reaction, and actually adding aluminum foil into aqueous copper chloride and resulting in aluminum chloride and a piece of copper that I could use gloves to pick up it kind of felt like magic. It was really exciting.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine. I remember walking into science classes in my in high school as well, and it is one of those things too where it's not just a visual thing. It's how a classroom is set up for science. There's smells, there's different textures, like even the tables are different. I remember the stools weren't
Yeah.
all that comfortable, but
No, they're not. No, they're not. But
but
yeah,
yeah,
no,
everything about that particular space just felt foreign, I suppose.
yeah,
And I can imagine it be quite daunting for somebody walking into that room more than others at times.
yeah. No,
What's
for
some of the
sure.
best advice that you sort of got when you did sort of go into the science field?
Best advice that I got from mentors and teachers was really just to keep an open mind
Yeah.
and to let the science tell you what it tells you. And we always need to hypothesize, which is really to come up with an educated guess, but we need to let the science tell us what it will tell us, and then we can learn from it. And I think there's a lot of merit to that. And when, for instance, when dealing with a pandemic like COVID-19 and forming vaccines for it, you can't just guess and then do your work and then send that out as the vaccine. It needs trials and periods of questioning and periods of really analyzing, does this actually work? And then once it's established that yes, it does in fact work, then that's when we have done our due diligence and have done our work and can move on and rest assured with the choice that we made.
So
But it's really to let the science speak for you, and then also to understand that science doesn't have to be visual. Oftentimes the way that we present data in the scientific community is very visual. So what I sort of learned, this was a takeaway for me in graduate school, is that I was a computational chemist in graduate school. So my laboratory was literally a bank of computers, or in the best case, my laptop computer, where I would run calculations on organic molecules, which are molecules containing carbon. And the calculations really perform many quantum mechanical calculations, and then they deliver data to us. And one of the things that I sort of realized, and one of the bits of advice that I gained is that, um, when you're studying chemistry or studying science, it's all about really letting your inhibitions go away, and let the chemistry or the science that you're studying sort of tell you what it needs to and wants to as you go. And that was kind of amazing. Sometimes I would run calculations, and we used a lot of tools like 3D printing to make structures, organic structures that would result from my calculations accessible to me. Um, I would feel the structure and just be blown away at how it was not what I was expecting. And other times it's like, yeah, that's great. That works out with my hypothesis. One of the other things that I learned is that, and this is a little more blindness related, is that when I slowed down a class and slowed a professor down and said, wait a minute, you need to tell me what you just wrote on the board, or slowed down the way things were moving quickly in my academic research group meetings in our research group, it actually helped everybody succeed and thrive even more, because it was in such a way that they could stop and think and gain more information. And the second item of interest here that I think is worth mentioning is that things that when we would make something accessible to me using, say, 3D printing, what my peers realized who are sighted is that, wow, they use what's called a graphical user interface, and they look at the screen in front of them and they see whatever I would be feeling, and they'd realize that they got more out of it as well when they could hold something in their hands. So my sort of principle in this whole area, and I tell anyone this, if you're going to make something accessible to you, really try to think hard and make it accessible to everyone else.
So, Hoby, you moved from your PhD into teaching. Was there an element of uh, if I could help promote other people like myself into the scientific fields, my place is to teach them?
During at the very end of my undergraduate tenure and the beginning of my graduate tenure, I started a nonprofit called Accessible Science, and our goal there was really to find blind and visually impaired, 14 to 20-year-olds basically, who had an interest in science but maybe haven't pursued it as far as they would want, and get them all into one place and focus with them on what is it that you want to do. And we would actually teach 3-day chemistry camps. We did 6 of these annually from 2011 to 2016. And one thing led to another with these chemistry camps, and students learned. The goal was, yes, to do some hands-on chemistry, some really fun lectures presented on how chemistry can be made accessible by professors at UC Davis, University of California, Davis, which is where I went to school, and other graduate schools. But underlying all that, the goal was to show students that they could do whatever they wanted, and study pursue whatever degree they wanted, no matter how visual subjects might seem. There's always a way to do whatever it is they want to do. And that gave me great inspiration to teach. And I actually ran that organization and that program all the way through my graduate tenure. So I taught all the way through graduate school. I actually still teach today, but in a far different environment as an entrepreneur. But teaching is something that really stuck with me, that I really appreciate and enjoy. Just not to stand in front of a room and profess things that other people might not know, and be this great professor with all the knowledge, but really just to get people excited about things that maybe they didn't know they were excited about, whether it be in the sciences or in the food and beverage industry or whatever the case may be. And that's my joy and true love for teaching. I will say that during graduate school, towards the end of my graduate school time in graduate school, my goal was to walk into a freshman chemistry lecture hall at the beginning of university with 500 students or whatever, and go in and show some of them that chemistry could be more than just the annoying prerequisite that they thought they had to take in order to succeed. That was my goal. And I had the honor of teaching several of these classes while in graduate school, and realized that students don't really speak chemistry. They really want to see beautiful animations and photos and pictures of everything. I realized that I was spending a lot of time and money working on making my presentations accessible to my students, which made them less accessible to me. So then I'd have to spend hours really memorizing and understanding the material before I could actually teach it in a way that was succinct and successful for my students. So it ended up being a lot of work and kind of an accessibility challenge to grade exams and even teach. The other thing I found is that students didn't read the book ahead of time. And I found in my college career that it was always helpful. And I think there are many people on this call who can agree with me, especially if you attended college or high school, even as someone who is blind or visually impaired. If you read the textbook ahead of time and make lecture feel more like a review than you're hearing the material for the first time, you get so much more out of it. And it would have made my teaching so much easier had the students come with a little bit of pre-game knowledge of the material. They just didn't seem to want to do that. So I thought about maybe stepping away from science. But as I say, once a chemist, always a chemist. And I actually use, even though I work largely in the food and drink industry right now, I feel like I use my chemistry in everything that I do.
So when you were talking about speaking chemistry, uh, who are your scientific muses? Who would you love to be locked in a room with?
Just anyone who really has an understanding of chemistry to the point that we can talk about it and communicate with it. I don't know if there's any one individual, but just anyone who's passionate about science and doesn't feel like they're just there to get a good grade.
That's a good point. And when you were running these particular classes and that sort of thing, did you find that you were having teachers or other teachers, seasoned teachers, wanting to learn some of the way that you went about things?
I definitely did. Yeah, a lot of people thought, there's a lot to learn from watching someone do this who has different ways of learning and then different ways also of presenting information. Yeah, that was
Yeah,
really exciting.
because I think in Australia in particular, there is an interest in science that I've come across from working with a couple of students that we have contact with. But what I've found is that the teachers have the interest as well, but don't always have the right muses to to sit down and say, well, this is how this is how you teach somebody who
Yeah,
wants to
no,
learn the field.
it's true. And it's funny because it puts a lot of bonus on us I thought you were talking about other teachers wondering
Yeah.
how I teach, but even as a learner, as a student, and whether we like it or not, as blind people, we have to take responsibility for our education and literally show our instructors what works best for us because chances are they will have never worked with someone who's blind before. So it really, and I feel like we, in order to be successful, have to be stewards of what we need and what we know in order to really thrive and succeed and win.
So I'd like to, at this point in time, just remind people with questions that you can ask a question using the Alt H key if you're using a screen reader, still wanting to have lots of your questions coming in. We're at the halfway point, which is probably why we're going to start pivoting towards your experience as a businessman, as an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Uh, you moved into this field and are now described as a sensory expert. Can you tell us a little bit about what a sensory expert does for large organizations that you work with?
It's really funny because it's a great term because nobody else does it, but it's also a really confusing term because nobody else does it. So it's always a catch-22 when I use that term. But here's a little backstory of how we got into this world. In 2011, just as I was finishing up my undergraduate work, I got a call from a film producer here in the United States named Francis Ford Coppola and his team. He did The Godfather and other productions, but he runs several wineries in the county where I grew up, which was quite close to where I was attending school. And he said that he wanted to have a truly blind wine tasting experience offered for hospitality and for guests that wanted to come to the winery and learn about wine in a very unique and quite different way. And he got my name from another friend and said, I want the person leading this to be a blind person. I know that you're very into wine and have a deep understanding of flavor. And I think you might be the right person to come to. And I didn't know at that point that I had a deep understanding of flavor, but I was awfully flattered. And I ended up chatting with him, and with his team. And, when someone like that calls you and says, can you do this? You say yes. And then you hang up and realize what you just agreed to do. What was amazing is he let me completely design this experience and innovate it. And the point of it was to use the blindfold not as a gimmick or as a fun way to create sort of gamified atmospheres, but really as an education tool, saying, hey, now that we're temporarily lacking of our eyesight, what additional things can we pay attention to that maybe we wouldn't notice otherwise? And we'd have certain aroma samples that people would pick up and smell, and these are things that would be found that I thought were in some of the actual wines that we'd be tasting, but they'd be things like lemon peel and star anise and oak chips and maybe sandalwood and all these sorts of things that we might pick up on, just to give people an opportunity to prime and warm up their aromatic vocabulary. And this soon took off into the world of their national sales team wanting to bring this to key players out in the market, that they wanted to bring something totally unique and one of a kind to, which was a great deal of fun for me and really exciting. What was lucky about being a computational chemist is that my laboratory was my laptop, as I said, and my advisor knew that there might be another option for me in a different career. I didn't know that I wouldn't necessarily go into academia at the time. I didn't know that at all, but he was just super supportive of me doing whatever it is I wanted that made sense to me and that also made sense to him, which was truly wonderful and frankly kind of him as well to have that attitude. So I actually traveled a lot and was able to maintain my graduate work. But through this experience, I realized that, I loved wine not because I drank a bunch of it, but because it was something that I could smell and understand and pull out individual aromas from and really gain an understanding of the sensory aspects in addition to the scientific aspects. And I think what got me excited about wine very early on is that I live in a place called Sonoma County, which is in Northern California. And we have quite a large wine region here. And I just always had a thing for hyper locality and knowing that, if something like a grape is being grown virtually in my backyard and then turned into wine and sold around the world as a premium product, it's kind of interesting to me. And I would pay special attention when I would taste it. My parents also made a vintage of wine a few years before I was born, just as home winemakers. And they would talk about that. And that was always absolutely fascinating to me. So one thing led to another for me, and got really excited about wine and about my palate. And I realized that I had a decent palate that I'd been developing since day one because my parents would hire me. One of my jobs was to cook them soups that they would freeze and take to work for lunches. So I should also add that my mother is a teacher of the visually impaired and just retired after about 30 plus years in the industry. So she was always highly motivational in me doing anything I could on my own and for myself in our house. And that, along with my dad led to me really gaining an understanding of flavors and how they come together. And that sort of morphed into me becoming a sensory expert. It was like I was finishing up with graduate school. I didn't really want to pursue it, more time, getting a postdoctoral fellowship, and didn't necessarily want to teach at the community college level or anything like that, which was also an option. But I had a childhood friend who I knew is also a major entrepreneur, and he actually grew up in the retail world, in the hardware industry. And I went to him and I said, I've really been developing this understanding of how I perceive the world. And I have a strong palate. I'm good in the food and drink industry, but also outside the food and drink industry, I'm always thinking about the detail of how things feel and how packages smell, even of electronics when we open them, and how things sound and all these sorts of things. So why don't we think about designing a company that offers sensory expertise? And what I like to say is that I offer everyone I work with a good non-visual lens into the deep design principles of what they do. And I think that in a nutshell is sensory expertise. And I like to call it sensory literacy, which is the fact that we really need to be literate in all five senses. And I think we're all visually literate, but if we can be literate and become literate in more than just the sense of eyesight, I think we're all really, really winning in that way. And I actually gave a TEDx talk all about this a few years back that I invite people to check out if you want to think more about sensory literacy and and how sensory, how we can all become more in tune with our senses and really frankly, get more out of life because of it.
So by the sounds of it, organizations come to you if they're wanting something to feel, smell, or taste a certain way, and
Yes,
these
or
would be
they
quite
don't.
strange requests, wouldn't it? It's almost like a Hoby. We want something to feel like, I don't know, like blue cellophane or something like that.
What was funny is they often don't know what they're asking for. They just say, "Are we on the right track?
Yeah.
Can you be a consultant here?" Actually, one of the people that we did some exciting work with is Breville Coffee right there in Sydney.
Yeah.
Gave a talk with a research designer from there, and then when I was in Australia a few years back, came and gave a talk all about sensory design to their team, and they innovate those principles, and they're always thinking not only now about how things look and how things are engineered, but rather how do they feel? How does our packaging smell? How can we make sure that we release as much coffee aroma as possible to make the person brewing the coffee feel a sense of, oh yeah, there's really coffee here, and feel an appetite because of it.
So yeah,
It's kind of bizarre.
it is a rather, as I said, it's one of those interesting sort of conversations where somebody comes to you and asks you, uh, am I on the right track with this really unusual request? And
They're
you're
unusual. They're
forced to,
totally unusual. I
yeah.
will say that right now, Jordan, I'm focusing most of my time, the vast majority of my time, in the food and beverage industry on product development and on experience design, like the one that I've just described, the experience in the dark. And that's one that I'd love to bring to Vision Australia at some point, using Australian wines to really engage people and get them thinking. Honestly, I think it could be a powerful fundraiser. Just want to throw that out there.
So you also have the opportunity as well, to break bread with some rather large decision makers, I imagine, as well, because everybody,
Sometimes.
eat and drink. Food and beverage is one of those things. It's a common terminology, to break bread, to make
Yeah.
to make allies, I suppose. Uh,
Yeah, and make friends. No, there's some fun people out there in the industry, and it's just exciting to work with people. My whole goal, I have three principles in everything that I do, and in all of my business. Do things for the community that help better the community and that help better your clients. Whatever my clients are trying to do. Number two, always have fun and try to be successful. And number three, don't take don't take no as an answer from anyone. You can do whatever the heck it is you want to do.
so,
And that's true in the food and drink industry as well.
so coming from a teaching background as well, you probably have a large number of people coming to you wanting to know how they can be successful in business as well, as you pointed out.
I
Do
I
you have
love coaching entrepreneurs. I love it. It's something that is just near and dear to me. It's business and science are both things where you never know everything. You're always learning and you're always discovering. And what I find, and I found this from my students in science as well, I often learn just as much or more from them than they might learn from me. And it's just a give and take.
do you have the terminology that gets used by sports scouts and that sort of thing? He has this trait that's going to make him successful. Is there one particular trait that you look out for when you are coaching young entrepreneurs?
I think this what I'm about to say is true for anyone and everyone, and definitely true for me and for my career. If I sit back and think about what has worked in the past and what hasn't, it's really to have an open, positive mindset. I don't care if you're blind, sighted, anywhere in between. If you put your mind to it, you can literally do whatever it is you want to do. And I think the way to arrive at that positive mindset of believing in ourselves is to take little challenges. And sometimes it's the smallest successes that boost us and propel us to that next level of believing in ourselves. If you haven't often been the person to walk across town to the grocery store, the supermarket to pick up supplies for dinner, and then come home and cook that dinner, do that. That empowers us. That feels good. We're doing something maybe we haven't done. We're stepping a little bit outside our comfort zone. And then if we succeed at that challenge, we feel so positive and we feel good about ourselves and we feel this sense of of self-worth that's such an unmistakable, and in my words, irreplaceable sense of confidence that pushes us forward into so many other areas that are almost maybe unimaginable to us. So it's all about taking that challenge on and having that mindset that we can do whatever it is we want to do. You know, I launched a products company. I launched a spice business last year during the pandemic. So I have spices that my partner and I have been using in our own kitchen that we created the recipes for, you know, many years ago, nearly a decade ago now. That's the other thing is I'm an amateur chef, and I just love spending time in my kitchen, which I call my lab, where I don't have to worry about an insurance policy from a larger institution. But you know, thinking about starting a spice business is a little daunting, and it was a little bit daunting. But I use the same exact, you know, way of saying this is really a high mountain to climb, and I don't know how I'm going to do it. So you build steps into the wall. You know, you build little challenges that you can overcome one little challenge at a time, and then the whole thing feels less daunting. And eventually it's done, and you look back and you say, okay, there's still a lot of work to be done, but I can't believe I got to this point of launching. And for me, that was the same process when I got into my PhD program. I remember sitting there the night that our first night of school, you know, we had a day of classes and then sort of a welcome party. And I was thinking at the welcome party, and especially when I got home, what have I gotten myself into? This is 5 to 6 years of research. How am I going to do this? I have no idea. And I went out and got a cup of coffee the next morning and was sitting at a cafe and thought, don't be silly. You can break this into challenges. The first challenge is getting through the first week of school. Okay, we did that. Now we get through the second week. Now we get through our first big, hard problem set. And it's literally just one thing after another, piecing it all together.
So Hoby, that's obviously a skill set that you've had for some time, which is fantastic, obviously, in making your way in the world. Is there something a older and wiser Hoby be saying to a younger Hoby?
Being the Hoby that I am, I don't know what that would be. But if I were to really think about it, I love that question. I think I'd say to myself, be more patient. You gotta be patient. You know, it's so easy as a science person or as an entrepreneur to just get really impatient. Things need to move faster, and they need to move quicker, and they need to happen more succinctly. And what I've realized over the past year, maybe a little over a year, is that there's nothing better and stronger than patience. You have to be patient and willing to just take things as they come.
So we've got a question from Namoy here. What's
Yeah.
one project you've worked on in the food or drink industry that you've enjoyed, or what's other than the one that you spoke about with the winery? What's something that an obscure sort of experience where you thought to yourself, you know, I never thought I'd be doing this?
It's a fun story. There's a few like that, but I'll tell this really weird one. A large tech company that produces smartphones and computers in Silicon Valley here in California reached out to their glass manufacturer, who's a huge Japanese company that makes about 60% of the total glass used in the world. And they said, we need a glass that feels more silky. And the glass manufacturer said, God, what do you mean silky glass? I don't know what to do. We don't know what that is. And they said, let's reach out to a design company. So they reached out to a company called IDEO. It's sort of a global design thinking agency. And IDEO said, God, we don't know what to say about, you know, glass being silkier, but we know this crazy sensory guy that we can call. So they called me, and I came in and worked with them. And what we did, because it was so hard to get this idea of glass texture through to the minds of product designers and industrial designers and engineers, first of all, we discovered fairly quickly that there were two metrics of glass texture, everything from rough and like kind of tractive, I would say, almost with little pebbles in the surface. They're very tiny, but you can feel them, to being sort of squeaky and smooth, to being then sticky, where your finger doesn't move across it at all the way to very slick, where your finger just slides right across. So they wanted to limit the number of glass textures that people felt to 4. And we brought well over 600 people through at this tech day, and at different stations had them pair each of these glass textures at one station with four different fruits that we've chose and selected, some dried, some fresh, that emulate in one way or another the texture of the glass. And then at another station, we had the people pair these glass textures to cheese on their palate. The gritty cheeses that have little calcium crystals in them were paired with the more gritty glass surfaces, and something that's just smooth and almost sticky was paired with like a really almost unctuously creamy cream cheese. And then at the end of the day, we brought everybody together and gave everybody a set of the glass samples and led a wine tasting where we had wines that on the palate felt much like the glass surfaces. And this allowed them to choose what glass they wanted to use in their next iteration, their next generation of smartphones and trackpads. So it was so much fun to use food, which is a tangible, and the texture of food and the way it feels on our palate and in our mouth to sort of teach something that's very intangible.
Yeah, fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. We've got a
It's
question
fun.
from Christy in regards to books that you may have written or ways that uh, we can engage with some of the things that you've done in your life.
Oh, it's a great question. Books that I've read a lot of really inspirational books. I really enjoy. There are a few.
Have you thought about educational textbooks for teachers and things like that?
Yeah, there are a few books that really come to mind that I think are really powerful. One is a book called Think and Grow Rich, and it's by a man named Elmer Hill, and he just tells a really he's an American writer, and just tells an amazing story of how to expand your mind and how to really view the mind and this mindset as the direction that we need to go. It's just a remarkable book that I think is very very helpful. I really, in terms of chemistry and the ways of thinking about science, have really enjoyed any book by Linus Pauling, who's a great chemist and author. Um, yeah, and unfortunately, I haven't done a huge amount of reading more inspirational books, but I will put together a book list for you because I think that's a great question.
Perfect. So how can people follow you now? What do you got planned for
Oh,
2022?
2022, we're doing a lot more of this personal consulting, on product development and that sort of thing. We are going to be launching a vodka line called Blind Truth Vodka probably in the next 3 to 6 months, and I really hope to get it in bottle shops around Australia. I am very deeply connected with a creative agency actually out of Adelaide, Australia. The owner, Jody Tucker, is my business partner in a company called SensePoint, which is a creative, because I think there's such a fine intersection between art and science. I co-founded SensePoint, which is a creative agency working a lot in the nonprofit industry and also anything that's not food or drink related. And Jody's company, Tucker Creative, works in, and the sky's the limit in terms of all food and drink brands. So he will have actually done the design work on the Blind Truth brand, and he did the design work on my spice company, which is Hoby's Essentials. So I love being more deeply connected with you all in Australia through business, and I'm hoping to make it out your way at some point and just really explore the world over time. That's mainly what I have planned for 2022. I will say that I do some work with a company called Be My Eyes, which you all might be familiar with. They do a lot of video assistance through the back camera on your phone if you need visual assistance. They have volunteer programs, but they offer specialized help, which is help by particular brands for those brands. And one of the companies that we're working with Be My Eyes on right now is Barilla, because Barilla Pasta was just onboarded last year, and that's with our business partner from Adelaide, Australia. That company. So that we're really excited about that, and can't share too much, but Barilla is going to be taking steps to make their packaging even more accessible. So we're thrilled with that, and that's one huge passion of mine.
Fantastic. Look, we're probably at that point now with a couple of minutes before we end up, where I thank you so much for your time, Hoby. It's been fascinating getting to know yourself and getting to know
Oh,
your love of chemistry and being able to understand the business acumen as well for somebody looking to get into those fields. So we really are greatly appreciative of your time. It sounds like it's very spread thin, your time.
it can be spread thin, but Jordan, I just want to say thank you so much to you. It's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you, and I hope this is just the beginning of a long and exciting relationship with you and with Vision Australia. I find what you guys do very powerful, and I just want to let everybody on the call know that don't be a stranger. Get a hold of me anytime at my personal website, which is Hoby, Hob like boy, Y, Wedler, WED like dog, LE like Edward, R.com. And anyone can email me at hobby@hobywedler.com. And I would love to hear from you. I think it's remarkable the work of Vision Australia, and just remember that you're saving, and well, not saving, but changing lives every day for the better.
Thank you. Thank you, Hoby. And look, as I said, I think we could afford to get some more Australian scientists traveling the world doing what you do. That would be
Let's
remarkable.
do it. I would love that. Anytime, anything I can do to help Vision Australia and to build science awareness and science opportunities throughout the blind and visually impaired community of Australia, I'm all there. I'm all ears.
Perfect. All right. Well, I might say once again, thank you. And we've got a couple of people messaging in. We've got a message from Barbara. Thank you so much for an interesting session, Hoby. And a
Thank you,
message from
Barbara.
Riri. Thank you for your inspirational talk about your life. So
Thank you guys so much.
we might end it there. Namoy, I'm going to end the webinar now, and hopefully this works. But
Thank you all so much. Stay safe and healthy, and most importantly, stay positive. Not in terms of the pandemic, but in terms of life.
Thanks, Hoby. All the best.
All the best.
Vision Australia.
Blindness,
low vision,
Opportunity.
Vision Australia logo. 3 navy blue ovals linked together diagonally within a bright yellow rectangle.